everyone who knows me knows that I can get very detailed, and pretty soon people are looking at me like, what's the clock? So I'll keep them kind of short. So the first story, and one I love sharing, is at this point, a year and a half ago, I had a dream at night, and in the dream, I was crossing in front of Victoria Falls, okay, which is a waterfall in Africa, and that's about all I knew. But I'd been walking with God in this long enough, there's enough backstory that I knew God was calling me there. Now, I had no interest in going to Africa at all, but I had this dream, and I'm like, all right, God, you provide, I'll go. Well, 3 days later, I get a letter from a couple that I knew, but I hadn't told this to, and in this letter, they said, we're supposed to buy you a ticket. Where do you need to go? Okay. And I'm like, all right. And so on a Saturday afternoon, I purchased a one-way ticket to Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, first Sunday morning. And I showed up at the airport at DIA with a one-way ticket, a carry-on backpack, and $3 in my pocket. And as I'm walking into the airport, a guy comes up to me and says, here, do you need this? And gives me about $300. Okay. I spent 6 months in Africa. Never fundraised, never asked for money, never told people what I needed. Okay, I was in 4 different countries: Zimbabwe, Zambia, South Africa, and Tanzania. Okay, technically Zanzibar, which is an island off the coast, but it's a part of Tanzania. 5 flights total. The flight there, 3 internal flights, and the flight back. All of it people coming to me and either asking me to go somewhere to pray for someone, or had heard of a dream or vision God had given me, and were like, we're the ones we're supposed to pay for it whenever you need to go. Okay? And it wasn't, there were only a few people from the States that ever provided anything. It was people that I met along the way. I had no contacts. Okay? I just showed up. And I say that, and there's so many stories that I could share out of that, but I say that not to say, okay, look at what I've done. I'm saying that was, as you trust God, as you walk in faith, he shows up. Okay? And so many people, and in our culture, we have this view and that in order to follow God, in order to do something great with God, that we have to have our act together first. Okay? And I'd like to share what Jesus has to say about that. He says, if you seek to save your own life, okay, if you seek to deliver your own life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake and the sake of the gospel, you will gain it. Okay, and with this, I'd just like to share, anybody here seen the movie Knight's Tale? Yeah, a few people. Okay, great movie, hilarious, right? But there's this one scene in there, this beautiful scene, where, of course, he's winning all these tournaments, right? But it's the woman, right? And all these knights are riding past her saying, I'll win this tournament for you, right? I'll win this tournament for you, my lady. And then, of course, the main character, he tells her the same thing. I'm going to win this tournament for you. And if you remember the movie, you remember she says, you would win this tournament for your own ego's sake. If you want to show your love, lose. Lose. Okay? And how many people, and what we do, we want to do big things for God. God, I'm going to do this for you. God, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I'm going to win people for you. And truth be told, that's not really what God's looking for. Okay, Jesus said it quite clearly to his disciples in multiple, it's recorded in multiple of the Gospels. He says, if you would be my disciple, leave everything and follow me. Okay, but that's not popular to preach. But that is the great equalizer. Because that means no matter what income you have or don't have, when God calls, you leave everything and follow him. That is good news. Okay? Because that's all he asks. He doesn't ask us to follow him in strength. He asks us to follow him in our weakness. And he becomes our strength. Okay? One more story, and I'll share this one. This is a little bit longer, but But it's just to give you an example. I was in Zambia on this trip to Africa. It was December 2015. I'd been in Zambia the full month. At the beginning of the month, when I crossed the border, God had actually told me to go with one of these guys that was just hawking things at the border. He's offering, to show me around Zambia, around Livingston in Zambia, for money, of course. And I had already told probably half a dozen of these guys, no, leave me alone. And the Holy Spirit says, no, you need to go with this guy. And it's an awesome story, but I went with this guy, ended up staying in this one-room shack in the worst ghetto in the area. Okay, when I did make connections outside of this, people are like, you're staying where? No, you can stay at my house. Like, no, that is not okay. But God put me there, and so I stayed there for 2 weeks. During that time, he introduced me to this truck driver that he'd help unload his truck just to make some extra money. And the guy, and of course the connections go on. I don't have time for that whole story. But this truck driver had wanted to meet with me on multiple occasions, and it just never worked out. I went other places in Zambia. I was down in the south. I was up in Lusaka. I was invited to stay for Christmas with a couple. But at the end of the month, I was at this couple's house. They're formerly, I want to be careful with what I share, but formerly high-level government positions. Great couple, Christian couple, and I'm staying with them. And again, I don't tell people how much I have or don't have, but at that point, I had 70 kwacha, which is $7 US. Okay, and I'd been totally out of money multiple times on the trip, and God just supernaturally provided. But at this point, I have $7. I'm staying with a couple that has influence. They have money. But again, I don't tell people what I need or don't need. Well, my visa was up on the 30th of December in Zambia, but because I'd come through Zimbabwe and the way it worked out, I had till the 31st in Zimbabwe on my visa, okay? Well, the end of the month comes, nobody's offered anything, and so I pay for a taxi to get to the border, which costs about 60 kwacha. So I have $1 left in kwacha, which is worthless in Zimbabwe, so I just give it away at the border, and I'm crossing the border, knowing that I've just left Zambia on the last day on my visa, the 30th. I have the rest of that day and one more day in Zimbabwe before I'm in violation of their law. And I'm like, God, what? He'd given me a dream. I was following it. I knew I was supposed to cross the border. My God, what the heck am I going to do? As soon as I walk into a border post, they're going to ask me, what am I going to do with one day? I have no onward travel. I have no money to go back into the country I just left. And once I go through this post, there's no way to get back. And very clearly the Holy Spirit just tells me, he says, you're going to have a friend buy you a ticket and you're going to fly out. And I laughed because I was like, well, all right. No one had volunteered that. And I had a SIM card, but I had 2 minutes left on my SIM card. Okay, which is like 2 text messages or a 2-minute call. And, but hey, this is what we're doing. So I walk into the border post. It's actually empty because Zimbabwe was playing a soccer game. Their national team was on, so of course. And I walk in. I'm like, well, maybe they're excited about the game. They won't even ask, So I'm making small talk with the border guard, and I hand him my passport, and their team's winning. They're in a good mood. And deadpan, you have 1 day left on your visa in Zimbabwe. What are you going to do with 1 day in our country? And I said, well, I'm going to have a friend buy me a ticket, and I'm going to fly out. And he says, okay, well, where's your airline ticket? I was like, this is Africa. You can't plan these things ahead. Yeah, okay, he stamps it and hands me my passport back. And I'm like, oh boy, now we're in big trouble, right? Because now I can't go back to Zambia where I have friends. Okay? And I'm like, well, God, what do I do? Well, I'd flown through Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, so I knew I could just walk into town. So I'm walking into town. It's about a mile walk. And I'm like, and again, I'm just praying, God, what do I do? What do I do? And he tells me, just go into town, sit down, and wait. That's not a very good strategy. When you're in a foreign country, about 12 hours, 24 hours away from being in violation of their immigration or their, whatever, tourist visa, and no money to stay anywhere and no food. But that's what the Holy Spirit says. So I walk into what I find is kind of the center of town, and I sit down and I wait for 30 minutes. Okay, now there's, I think Einstein may have had something about this of time is relative, and how time goes much faster when you're with like a pretty woman. Well, time goes very slow when you're in a foreign country with no way out. And about 30 minutes in, I get a phone call, and it's this truck driver that I'd met in Zambia at the beginning of December. And he's calling me, and I'm like, because I know if I take this call, that's it. I have no way out, right? I have 2 minutes. I'm like, well, why not? So I take the call, and I answer, and he was like, hey, Devin, because he was actually South African. I should have probably explained that. And he was a truck driver. Told you that, but he was South African, spoke English very well. And he's like, hey, Devin, where are you at? And I was like, well, I actually had to leave the country because my visa was up. I'm now in Zimbabwe, in Victoria Falls. And he says, I live in Victoria Falls. I just got into town last night. Do you have any plans for this afternoon? No plans that I can think of. And he's like, can I come pick you up? I'm like, yeah, I'm in the middle of town. And I start to describe it and the phone dies. I'm out of minutes. Like, well, I hope he finds me. And another 30 minutes goes by. Again, not as long. It was amazing. The second 30 minutes was much shorter than the first 30 minutes. Yeah. And he comes walking up at one point and he's like, hey, I tried to call. What happened? I was like, well, my phone died. I just leave it at that. Anyway, he takes me around and he's like, hey, you want to have a barbecue with me and my wife? I'm like, yeah, that would be really good. So we went over, we're talking, we're visiting. She's like, no, I know you probably already have a hotel, but if you want to stay a few days, we'd love to host you and have you stay at our house. And I'm like, actually, I don't have a hotel yet. That would be really nice. Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, they don't know the situation. And so we talk, and I actually share a story of walking someone through deliverance that I don't normally share, very intense, the kind of story that makes your hair stand on end. But for whatever reason, I felt like God wanted me to share it. And as I did, the guy's behavior he got very introspective. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but we'll see. Well, at one point he tells me, he says, my brother has a lot of these same things in his life. Would you be willing to go and pray for him? He lives in South Africa. I'm like, well, your brother needs Jesus, not me, but I'll pray if that's where I'm supposed to go. He's like, all right, while you do that, I'll drive you around. We'll show you the non-touristy sites around Victoria Falls. I'm like, all right. So we drive around. So I have pictures of me, like the river behind the falls, and, it's pretty cool. But on our drive, the Holy Spirit just reminds me of a dream I had about 3 days before that I had no idea what it meant. And when I have a dream like that, I just hold it open-handed, right? I just wait. And so I look at him, I'm like, all right, this is what God reminded me of when I was praying. And based on this dream, yes, I'm supposed to go and meet with your brother. No, he will not meet with me. Which totally defeats the purpose of going, right? And he's like, hey, doesn't matter. Anything to do to help my brother, I'll pay for a ticket. I'll take you to the airport tomorrow, and I'll buy you a ticket. And I'm like, are you sure you don't want to do a bus or something like that? He's like, no. I don't know. He says, I'll buy you a ticket down there. I'm like, all right. And so on the 31st of December, the last day on my visa in Zimbabwe, I had a friend buy me a ticket and I flew to South Africa. And again, I just share that you can trust God. You can trust him. Okay? But there is a call to let go of your life for his kingdom. Okay, and it doesn't always look like mine. I have a friend here in Colorado Springs, and he started having dreams and visions. I prayed for him, walked him through some things. And one of the things God showed him in a dream was a business he was supposed to start. So he started moving forward with it. He'd never owned a business before. Started moving forward with it, and then God gave him another dream of the building he was supposed to lease. Him and a friend drove around for 3 days in Colorado Springs. And they finally went to a part of town they'd never been to before, and that exact building was there, with the parking lot and the little grass field out in front. Okay? What I'm sharing is that, again, you can trust God. Okay? And your life doesn't have to be perfect. Right? When Jesus called Peter, he was in a boat fishing. Same with James and John, right? Matthew was sitting behind a tax booth. when God calls, he doesn't tell you to get everything in order. He just calls. And if you leave everything and follow him, you'll have the greatest adventure of your life. So, thank you.